Being an Ottoman princess was unlike any ordinary life. From the moment they were born, their existence was shaped by strict rules, palace protocol, and careful observation. The harem, often misunderstood as a place of indulgence, was actually a school of etiquette, loyalty, and obedience. Girls were educated in literature, religion, and arts, but the lessons rarely included anything about relationships or adult life outside the palace walls. Their daily life revolved around routine, study, prayer, and supervision, leaving little room for personal freedom. Even their play was monitored, and friendships carefully guided. The psychological effect of growing up in isolation created a sense of vulnerability and dependency on palace hierarchy. They were surrounded by attendants who instructed them on every behavior, yet provided little practical guidance for the intimate, personal aspects of life they would eventually face. By the time a princess reached the age for marriage, she was intelligent and cultured but unprepared for the emotional and physical realities of matrimony. The combination of expectation, ignorance, and confinement set the stage for fear that would dominate their first wedding night, turning what should have been a private union into a moment of overwhelming anxiety. For Ottoman princesses, marriage was never a personal choice. From childhood, it was clear that their unions were tools of diplomacy and political strategy. They were married off to powerful pacha governors, or loyal soldiers to secure alliances, reward service, or strengthen the empire's internal structure. The princess's consent was seldom considered, as their marriages reflected not just personal honor but the sultan's power and the stability of the state. Refusal was rarely an option, and failure to adapt could bring shame or even danger. The knowledge that their personal happiness was secondary to political goals added to the tension surrounding marriage. They were often paired with men they had never met, sometimes decades older, who held influence and authority over entire regions. Their families and attendants prepared them for formalities and etiquette, but rarely offered guidance on emotional compatibility, intimacy, or personal boundaries. The weight of duty created an invisible pressure. One wrong move could affect alliances, destabilize trust, or reflect poorly on the sultan. This constant tension meant that by the time the wedding night arrived, fear was not just about intimacy, but about navigating a delicate balance between loyalty, duty, and personal survival. Ottoman weddings were elaborate affairs, full of color, music, and pageantry, designed to showcase wealth and influence. Princesses were adorned in luxurious gowns, jewelry, and veils, often participating in days-long ceremonies involving the court and palace officials. At first glance, these weddings seemed like celebrations of love, but behind the scenes, tension and anxiety were constant companions. Every detail, the type of clothing, the ceremonial seating, even the order of dances was steeped in symbolism and scrutiny. Attendants watched carefully, ensuring the princess performed each act correctly, while the family assessed her comportment as a reflection of the sultan's household. The outward joy masked the inner turmoil of young women, aware that their personal feelings were secondary to political expectation. Despite lavish gifts and blessings, their minds often raced with worry about the unknown challenges of their new life. The rituals themselves, while beautiful, were reminders that they were entering a role with strict rules, scrutiny, and expectations. The pressure to behave perfectly and maintain decorum amplified their fear of the wedding night. It was not a private moment of love, but a continuation of the same controlled life they had known since childhood, now intensified by the stakes of marital duty and political significance. The first wedding night was a moment fraught with fear, anxiety, and secrecy. Ottoman princesses approached it not as a romantic milestone, but as a trial they had to navigate perfectly. They had received no practical education about intimacy or their own bodies, so fear of the unknown loomed large. Attendants prepared them meticulously, hiding advice, positioning them, and sometimes staying nearby to oversee the rituals. The pressure to perform properly, both physically and emotionally, was immense. Any misstep could be noticed and reported, potentially bringing shame to the princess and her family. Beyond personal performance, there was the tension of the husband's expectations. In many cases, these men were older, powerful, and unaccustomed to sharing control, heightening the princess's anxiety. The silence surrounding sexual knowledge compounded the fear. They had grown up in an environment where modesty and obedience were paramount, making intimacy feel foreign and intimidating. Fear of pain rejection, or failure created a psychological barrier that was often harder to overcome than any physical obstacle. What might seem like a private encounter was actually a highly scrutinized event, blending political stakes with personal vulnerability, leaving the princess navigating a complex web of expectation, tradition, and fear on the very first night. The consequences of the first wedding night extended far beyond a single evening. Ottoman princesses lived in a system where personal missteps could ripple into political ramifications. If the marriage failed or the princess was unhappy, it could be perceived as a reflection on the sultaness' judgment or the family's honor. Husbands, often influential men, wielded power not just over their wives, but over regions, armies, or entire provinces, making compliance essential. Attendants and court observers monitored behavior, ensuring the princess fulfilled her expected role. Control over her life remained tight, and failure to meet expectations could lead to restrictions, gossip, or social stigma. The first night was the initial test of endurance, diplomacy, and poise. It was also a moment where personal agency clashed with systemic control. The princess's ability to navigate her fear, perform rituals correctly, and maintain composure was critical, not just for personal survival, but for political stability. The palace environment ensured that fear was rational, as missteps could carry real consequences. Their lives, while outwardly glamorous, were filled with pressure, scrutiny, and invisible boundaries, making the first wedding night a symbol of both personal vulnerability and political obligation. Looking back, it is easy to assume that life for an Ottoman princess was luxurious and carefree. In reality, the gold, silk, and grandeur of the palace were accompanied by fear, duty, and confinement. Their apprehension on the first wedding night was not a result of personal weakness, but of a system designed to control and scrutinize every aspect of their lives. Fear arose from isolation, lack of knowledge, political pressure, and rigid traditions, making intimacy a complex and intimidating experience. These princesses carried the weight of family honor, the sultan's reputation, and the empire's political interests into what should have been a private, intimate moment. Their stories remind us that history is not only about battles, conquests, and royal splendor, but also about human emotion, vulnerability, and resilience behind closed doors. By examining their fear, we gain insight into the hidden realities of palace life and the intricate balance between power, tradition, and personal experience. The first wedding night, then, becomes a lens through which we understand the intersection of politics, culture, and human emotion, revealing the extraordinary challenges faced by women whose lives were dictated by duty, status, and the expectations of an empire. In the end, the story of Ottoman princesses and their first wedding night is not just about fear or royal protocol. It is a story of humanity living within the confines of power and tradition. These young women were expected to navigate a world filled with luxury and scrutiny, privilege and pressure, love denied in favor of duty. Their fear was not personal weakness, but a reflection of centuries-old systems that placed the empire's stability above individual happiness. By understanding their experiences, we see a side of history rarely told: the emotional struggles, the private anxieties, and the courage it took simply to exist under such expectations. The first wedding night becomes more than a ritual. It becomes a lens into the lives of women whose stories were hidden behind palace walls, whose silence concealed both vulnerability and resilience. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by battles and kings, but also by the quiet, often unseen struggles of those who lived within the systems of power. And in acknowledging their fear, we honor their strength, their endurance, and the complex realities of life behind the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire.